So we're going to talk about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's been in the news a lot lately, and generally about cryptocurrency, alternative economics in general. So what we have here lately is this Mt. Gox debacle. Really, is what I'd call it. It's a pretty interesting story. What are you guys' thoughts generally on what's been going on in the news with this?
I think it's interesting. I think there's a lot that's yet to be known about what's going on. I think we're obviously in the very beginning stages of finding out what's going on with Mt. Gox in particular. But I think when all the dust settles, I think a lot of people are going to be pretty surprised by what was going on and how they got hacked and who hacked them and
right,
things of that nature.
What we're talking about here is a $400 million loss, over $400 million loss in Bitcoin, and apparently it essentially just disappeared in a puff of smoke. At least that's what all indications are from the news media.
I think it was 744,000 individual Bitcoins were lost at Mt. Gox alone.
Pretty incredible.
I would like to know who's doing the auditing at these things at Mt. Gox.
Yeah, I assume it's an internal process with the auditing. But then, you have like the framework, the chain that it's supposed to record transactions, So look, I don't know if any of us are competent enough to talk about the technological aspect or the financial aspect, of how these things are recorded, but still it seems to be a pretty suspicious kind of thing.
Yeah, like you just said, I'm not really 100% clear on the actual process of it, but definitely at first sight, it definitely seems like there's a lot of holes to the whole idea behind it.
First of all, maybe it'd be convenient for us to talk about Bitcoin in general. Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, online currency, based on just algorithms. It's used heavily. It seems to be a lot for investment at the moment, but also for consumer use, online consumption. One of the big hubs. Actually, this was recently in the news too, and I think it's kind of tied to this Mt. Gox situation. Is the Silk Road? The Silk Road was essentially a marketplace for narcotics, heavily in narcotics. Also, for a period of time, weaponry, pornography they were supposedly involved in as well. And they were brought down. The one of the founders, Ross William Ulbricht, was arrested. Large amount of Bitcoin seized, 26,000 Bitcoins, $36 million seized in that bust, which kind of broke up one of the main Bitcoin marketplaces online, accessible through the darknets. And I think that's kind of tied into the whole thing. Honestly, I suspect deeply that the two busts are related. But Bitcoin, online currency, user-generated, not tied to any kind of state currency. Currently today, it's trading for, one single Bitcoin is trading for $558.20.
That's a lot of money for something that doesn't technically exist. A lot of the people, I'm reading some articles, a lot of people have been saying that it's being bought and sold as a commodity versus as a legitimate currency. And I think that is a little telling for how a lot of these investors are looking at it. And obviously, there's the investors that look at this as an alternative to currency, as something that could potentially take the place of state-funded currencies. But I don't know. I don't know if I see that, especially because there's absolutely no accountability to these coins where they're not really being held in a quote unquote bank. It's an odd program that creates these things. And I think we're seeing the first instance with this whole it being a lot of them being hacked and stolen. I don't know how much failsafe there is to these programs that can thwart potential hackers going in and taking tons of it.
That's true. And I'd actually like to talk a lot about alternative currency and the ramifications of non-controlled currency in a little while. I'd like to specifically talk about this Mt. Gox situation first, though. Just in general, like the ramifications of having a non-state oriented currency and why this happened, okay, and who's behind what happened, and obviously this is just going to be speculation, conjecture at this point because we don't know all the facts, but doesn't it seem suspicious that there is this huge fallout, this huge undermining issue with the Bitcoin currency when you have, various entities being so interested in Bitcoin right now, tying it to state markets? Like, what's the interest of states and financial institutions in tying Bitcoin to their own, existing markets? And who does this benefit? This whole debacle? Because obviously it causes chaos. We have this Washington Post article talking about states wanting to regulate Bitcoin.
Right.
So what are the ramifications here, and who stands to benefit?
I kind of feel like it defeats the whole purpose. The whole reason behind Bitcoin, the whole beauty behind it was its decentralization. Its ability to have a currency that's decentralized, and now we're gonna have it tied into an overarching bank.
Yeah.
To me, it's just sort of. I personally don't see any sort of potential behind it. There's others that really think that this is the way to go, but I guess that the argument for it is that you need someone or something to sort of oversee and regulate it, so further hacks and further exploitations don't occur.
But who would that entity be? Would that be the World Bank? Right? Or some other multinational, financial institution? Would it be an actual private bank? Would you have like Goldman Sachs regulating Bitcoin? Would you have the Federal Reserve as being the essential state bank of the world's largest superpower regulating it? Would you have a Chinese banking institution? Or for that matter, maybe an EU banking institution regulating it? Like, who exactly would be in charge of regulating these things, and what would that mean for the future of the currency?
Right. And like, let's say, for example, Wall Street did regulate it. What really separates it from the dollar then?
Right. It would be tying down and enslaving an alternative currency to state-centered currencies.
Right. Well, when this first all happened with Mt. Gox, I was watching CNBC because I was interested in just how far Bitcoin was falling during that day. And there was a guy on there, and I don't remember the guy's name, but he was talking about he was in talks with. He had a group who was getting together to create another site similar to Mt. Gox, and he said that he was in talks with 6 world banks and the U.S. government. Now, when they asked him who the banks were, he said he couldn't talk about it because the deal, was still in the talks. He didn't want to drop any names. But I think that's a little telling to where this could potentially go, at least in the U.S. and Europe and some of the more industrialized nations who are a little concerned about online currency. But I'm curious what type of banks would be getting involved, because a lot of these world banks initially were saying, this is just a fad. This isn't a currency. They were looking at it the same way as it just being traded as a commodity. But when it's still going, what did you say it was $554 that it's going for?
$558.20.
I mean, that's a lot of money. That is actually what gold was at about 10 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
And you got to remember that Bitcoin started out at a couple dollars a coin.
Yeah.
So that it's grown an incredibly quick rate in just 5 years. Really, I think it's only been around for 4 or 5 years. So it'll be interesting with the fallout of this Mt. Gox. And actually, there was an article in the Boston Metro talking about how the U.S. was subpoenaing Mt. Gox and 2 other sites that trade Bitcoins. So this could be a potential crackdown of this whole anonymity thing that is so cool about Bitcoin.
I completely agree with that, and I think that what we should all remember here is that anytime something radical or outside the box happens, first the states, non-state actors say, "Oh well, this is just a fad. Okay, this is something that's associated with hippies, or it's something that's associated with marginalized people, or something that's a deep minority."
Right.
Now, if something like this catches fire, a lot of people start to use it, then they go in and they find a way to co-opt and take control of it. I mean, this is a pattern throughout history that we've seen time and time again. What we have to remember is that the people who advocate the status quo are not these stuffy, non-rational actors. In fact, the powers that be, people in authority, are very dynamic. I mean, we have to give them that. They're very dynamic, and they're well prepared to act on shifting changes in behavior. And taking advantage of the Bitcoin situation, taking control of it, and spinning it into something that fits into the status quo is perfectly within their wheelhouse. Their paradigm.
Oh yeah.
I mean, these are not stupid people.
Yeah, definitely. They're no doubt very opportunistic, and that was always my biggest beef with Bitcoin, was the whole issue of hacking. I mean, anything that's solely based on in the digital realm, to me, I don't care how safe you say it is. There's always going to be that threat that there's going to be some savvy computer literate hacker that could really exploit some unknown issue. And I think very possibly the powers that be have noticed that is the main issue, and have done just that, exploited it, and sort of ruined the confidence behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of goes to the larger philosophical issue here, is control and the authoritarian control of commerce and economics. That they're very willing to take control of a situation like this so they can tie it into their existing framework.
I wonder how much control can you really have over this? Now, obviously this thing is created through this algorithm that creates these coins. So there's a way, if it's a system, it can be hacked. We've seen with China hacking into American files. We've seen America hacking into multiple different countries' files. Russia, every single country in the world has hacked into another country at one point in time or another. So, I guess it then becomes, well, how good are you as a programmer to create fail-safes, to create firewalls, to create all these loopholes that people can't, crack into your system and steal whatever it is. And really, and a Bitcoin I think it's a lot more vulnerable than banking institutions and stuff. But, I mean, you look at modern day, a lot of people do their banking online.
Yeah.
Well, you're running through a network online. There are codes being run through a public domain of the internet. Someone can hack that. So I think this should be a wake up to a lot of people, and to say that here's a perfect example of that when people talk about this with ATMs and stuff and going to plastic and not having physical cash. One day you go to the ATM and there's no money there. Well, this is what happened for the people who had Bitcoin through Mt. Gox, and that's not really outside the realm of possibility for other types of currency.
Yeah.
So that I think this should be this shouldn't be looked at lightly as, oh well, this was just this online currency trend thing, and it was poorly regulated. Well, I'm sure the guys who created this, I'm sure that the programmers didn't just throw this together half-heartedly and just slop it up on the internet so that people would start trading. I'm sure that this was well designed.
These aren't stupid people.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing is, don't they sell this idea of safety to us? Like, they sell this idea like, all right, we're going to step in and monitor your communications, but it's because we're trying to keep you safe from terrorism, right? So we're going to step in and we're going to take control of Bitcoin because we're going to keep your money safe, right? We're going to make everything safe. And that's like that, it's the mindset of the state where they say, hey, we're the only people who can keep you safe. Well, look, I'm sorry. The world isn't safe. Being alive isn't a safe thing. And that's really, isn't that part of the joy of being alive? You don't know what's going to happen. The safety is not guaranteed here in anything. And even in normal currency. I mean, look what happened in 2008 with the economic crash. Your money wasn't safe. Your mortgage wasn't safe.
Yeah.
The government can't keep you safe all the time. So this when they step in and governments and institutions say, you know what? If you just give us a little more, if you just give us a little more control, we're going to keep you safe. Don't believe it, because they're not going to keep you safe, because nobody could keep you safe.
It's true. The world's a dangerous place. You could step out at any point in time and something can happen to you. I mean, you can die at any second. And that's not this,
We're not trying to be nihilistic here.
It's not paranoia. I mean, this is a fact of life. Everything dies. I mean,
Franz Kafka, he said, the meaning of life is that it ends. Right? And that's an essentialist statement, but I mean, that's that's the core of it, isn't it? I mean, you have to figure out what you want to do in a period of time, because you only have a period of time. There will be a period at the end of the sentence of your life.
And I think really this all ties in with Bitcoin and the idea that you got to adapt. You got to look. You got to change with the times. Here we are. Okay, now this Mt. Gox. This was one of the big players in the trade of Bitcoins. They got hacked. Obviously we don't know everything, but I mean, a lot of things were stolen. So now we got to look at how to change. And that doesn't mean that we got to just clear house and then just give control over to the world banks because they're an established power. That was the point of Bitcoin, was to pull away from that.
Right.
So I think there's probably a lot of people out there that we don't even know about right now who are looking at the program, who are trying to tweak it, who are trying to create a better program. And let's remember, Bitcoin is not the only digital currency out there. There's a lot of other digital currencies that we're not talking about.
Absolutely. This is just the most popular one, the one that caught, the public's eye, the one that kind of gained the most notoriety. There are a lot of other cryptocurrencies, and there are a lot of alternative currencies out there.
And I think that's the most powerful thing about cryptocurrencies is it's redefining what money and currency actually is. our very fundamental ideas of what money is I think a lot of people are sort of reevaluating that idea, or at least I hope they are. And I think you can't change that. I mean, yeah, you can bring down the currencies and whatever, co-opt it, but at the end of the day, when people start doubting the validity of the established paradigm of money, the end is near, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it involves kind of breaking down the concept of currency to its core purpose, which is the reallocation of resources from group to group, person to person, right? I mean, that's at its core what currency is supposed to facilitate. So you have all these monetary systems that have evolved in response to that and to fill that void. And you have a lot of people, and I would encourage people to look up 2 books. One, David Graeber, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, which is an incredibly concise look at the history of currency and the idea of debt. And Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics, which is an excellent book talking about the repurposing of economic theory toward a more egalitarian and functional system. Those 2 books I highly recommend to everyone listening. But what they're essentially talking about is what is the philosophy behind economics in the first place, and how do we reevaluate our concept of economics to fit the modern world and to fit a more rational, egalitarian worldview. So, I mean, looking at the concept that way, that money is just a way in which we shift resources around, well, then why do we need state-controlled currencies? Why do we need those things? Because on a daily basis, we all share things, we all move resources around. Aren't there other ways besides state-controlled currencies that we can shift resources around? So if you start to think outside the box like that, there are a lot of alternatives. And, Bitcoin has the capacity to do that. The other cryptocurrencies have that capacity. Why can't we look at alternative methods?
I think a lot of people are set in their ways with the idea of currency. And I think it's, if you really look at the history of currency and how it's adapted and how it's changed over these years, when you think about these online currencies, anyone technically could make an online currency. And that's sort of what's happened. Now, I mean, there's not millions of them out there, but I'd be willing to say there's got to be at least 50 of them out there. I mean, now are all of them trading at the level of Bitcoin? No. I think there's only maybe a half dozen that are in the talks at the level of Bitcoin. They're not worth the amount that Bitcoin's worth, but they're worth enough that they're getting airtime. But I think that's interesting because if Bitcoin were to fail, if they were to crash because of all this, well, there's other coins out there. It's like back in 2008 when the financial crisis happened, and the U.S. government bailed out a bunch of these banks. They said, it was the banks and it was the financial institutions. They said these things were too big to fail. Well, let's transition that into looking at Bitcoin, these other currencies. Well, if Bitcoin were to fail, we have a bunch of other currencies, a bunch of other cryptocurrencies coming up to pick up the slack. So why couldn't we have done that in the financial sector back in 2008? We could have really cleared house. We could have really, if we're really an open market, then that would have opened up the door for a lot of other financial institutions, a lot of other ideas on how to deal with finance. And I think it would have eliminated a lot of the gross overspending, because let's not forget here, these banks that were giving out these, and they're giving out all these loans and stuff, they weren't forcing people to take these loans. These people were taking the high interest loans. They, you got to remember what you're doing, and how much money you actually own. But it's the same thing with this Bitcoin thing. I mean, I think you got to be crazy to invest your entire portfolio into Bitcoin, because you never know what can happen. You got to diversify in anything you do. But I think that this is an interesting comparison to that, where we might see Bitcoin potentially fall to the wayside, and then you'll have these other cryptocurrencies to take its place. And I think that's a good thing. I think anytime you have multiple things in the in the economy, in the stratosphere, I think that allows for less centralization. It allows for less chance of monopolies, and those are good things. It's a good thing to have competitiveness in this global capitalist system that we all live in.
And by their nature, a decentralized environment like that is going to be volatile. There's going to be booms and busts. You can't stop that. You just have to embrace it. And I think that's what people sort of need to understand about this whole thing.
Right. And honestly, this is the conversation here that I think needs to be taking place. Like, first of all, Pat, there will be booms and busts. Now, they say that about a capitalism too, right? The mainstream capitalist system. That there's booms and busts. However, we've seen over the last several hundred years that the booms and busts always seem to benefit the people who already have money, right? And what we're talking about here is what I think we need to be talking about, is a web of decentralized currencies, right? A web of decentralized alternative, quote unquote, means of conducting transactions. And I think that's the real radical idea here. That's the real interesting idea, is that you have local economies having their own local ways of conducting economics, which are tied into larger webs of trade, right? So you have all these decentralized networks, none of which are dependent on another network globally, and none of which, will sink a global economy, but which just serve to shift resources from one point to another. So I think that's truly the conversation we should be having. How do we conduct a decentralized network of currencies that'll function globally? Right? Because clearly the global system we have now, with all this interdependence between state currencies, isn't really benefiting anybody. I mean, look at the third world. Is the Chinese currency, the American currency, the euro, are the price stabilities or instabilities of those currencies benefiting somebody in Sudan? Are they benefiting somebody in Yemen, Somalia? No, they clearly aren't, right? Even in the developing world, India. I mean, how exactly is the current system of allocation of resources, let's call that economics, how is it benefiting people in those areas? And how is it benefiting somebody in Detroit? It's not. So how do we create a web of alternative currencies? Because it seems like, to me personally, like a web of alternative currencies seems like more stable. It's decentralized. Decentralized systems always seem more stable to me.
They're paradoxical, I mean, they're more stable, but at the very time, by their very nature, they're unstable, because there is no overarching structure controlling it and evening out the curves, and that's the beauty behind it, because it gives freedom to the individual. Right. And this is the whole point behind, sure, even if Bitcoin were to become extinct, the cat's out of the bag. Cryptocurrencies are here. In my opinion, I think they're here to stay. There's always going to be a new one. They're going to keep innovating the idea. So,
with one caveat, if individuals are able to keep control of the internet, because I think a big danger behind this whole Bitcoin, debacle here is if they take control of the cryptocurrencies, that's one huge, gigantic step towards states controlling the internet. And I think a lot of internet activists need to be aware of that. Look, if they take control of these cryptocurrencies online, they will have a huge chunk of the internet at their control. And if you want to keep a free internet, you should be in favor of free cryptocurrency as well, because if they take an inch, they'll take a yard.
Wow,
that's a shoehorn into the internet. Especially if it's the transfer of money, because that's their specialty. Their specialty is in controlling money, and if they're able to do that on the internet, they'll be able to control the internet as a whole, and that's something an internet activist, a freedom activist should be concerned about.
I don't know how close they are to doing that right now. That's why I was really intrigued by that guy that was on CNBC that I was talking about earlier. Like I said, I don't remember the guy's name. I don't remember who he was affiliated with. He was through some financial firm. I had never heard of it when I saw it. But it's interesting that he's working with these world banks. One of the things about these cryptocurrencies, let's throw out a hypothetical situation that these world banks take over Bitcoin and they're regulating Bitcoin. Well, that doesn't mean that now Bitcoin is the be-all, end-all. Like we were saying, there's multiple other currencies out there. So these people out there who are investing in cryptocurrencies for the decentralization aspect of it, I would think a lot of those people would immediately cash out of Bitcoin and then move towards another currency that's not being regulated by a financial institution.
Which I'd recommend.
It might become this chase because like I said, anyone can make a cryptocurrency really. Right. I find currency in general becoming more and more radical.
Yeah.
If you look at the trend of in the old days, it was this gold and silver. And then when we created money, it was backed by gold. And then, of course, with the Federal Reserve Act, the money stopped being backed up by gold. And now here you have cryptocurrency that's not backed by anything, that's not even technically real. It's just a figment of the internet. The currency in general is becoming more and more radicalized. And I think that's an interesting thing. I don't know what that means moving forward as far as stability in financial sectors. That may ultimately be a good thing to create a new sort of financial sector. But these are definitely interesting times as far as where we're heading in the way we view exchange, currency, and monetary values of that nature.
Right.
I personally think that alternative economics, different economic systems are a key towards cultural change, are key toward building a different society, because it's increasingly our concept of our cultures and the world system as a whole are tied with the capitalist mindset, right? And this has been done, especially in the 20th century, but even before that, we see the trends toward building, this capitalist mindset. And I think to kind of free ourselves of that, we're going to have to come up with alternative currencies. And it seems like a lot of academics call the period we're living in late capitalism, right? Now, these are people in the ivory tower who are just looking at things and theorizing, right? But they're saying this is probably the end of capitalism. Like, we're probably reaching the end of capitalist viability. It's not going to be sustainable through this period of time. Now, obviously, you have a lot of people saying different things about that. I mean, it may very well, we've talked about global warming. It might be very well through the doom of the human race that capitalism ends. But I'm not quite so pessimistic there. I think capitalism will just end and we'll shift to something better if we're all aware of it and able to shift to something better. Right. And I think alternative currency is a part of that, especially I was reading about the Ithaca dollar earlier. Now, this is a time-based currency, whereas you go and work for somebody for an hour and you get an Ithaca dollar, okay, which has a value in that community. In this case, it's Ithaca, New York, but there's versions of this all over the United States, all over the world, especially Japan apparently is real into it. So you go and maybe you serve as a day nurse for somebody, in their home, or you are a plumber and you go and fix things, right? And you have this Ithaca dollar, which is redeemable for labor from somebody else. So if you're a plumber, you go help somebody, you need your house painted, you have these Ithaca dollars, you give them to a painter, they paint your house, So it's closer to, what Eisenstein or Graeber would call a gift economy in that sense. So you're trading time for time amongst people who are in your community. And that seems like an interesting way to structure the basic unit of community economics, right? So you have that kind of thing where it's not currency in the traditional sense, but it's currency in terms of time and labor, which is essentially what, you know, currency is built on. You know, you're selling your body and time for a specific, you know, worth value, right? So I think that kind of thing is interesting. There are all these alternatives out there just for like local and then regional economies that I think we should be building on those rocks. I mean,
Right.
I think that's interesting, but it doesn't account for the cost of resources.
no, it doesn't, and that's a flaw there. Yeah.
I think now, you know, if in a local sense, that might be a little bit, it might work locally, but like I said, with the cost of resources, that's the X factor. And that's actually a big X factor because it's based off of global economics. So I don't know. I think, you know, I think if there was a good solution on how to move forward, I think somebody would be out there right now preaching it.
I think there are people who are, honestly, you know, but it's...
I don't know if there's... I haven't heard anything that when I hear it, I think that's a great idea. I've heard cool ideas. I've heard things that obviously can move us away from the stranglehold of reserve banks and the world banks. And I think we should. I think the hold of the IMF and the world banks, it doesn't allow for the freedom of the economy and the way we think that the economy is free.
I think we all agree with that.
So I think that there's obviously things that need to be done, but I mean, you know, this cryptocurrency is an interesting thing. I personally don't see it as the way of the future. I see it as a threat to the financial institutions if it's done correctly. Now, this thing with Bitcoin is definitely a hit to the to people's trust of what cryptocurrency can be, but I think there's always fraud, there's always hacking, there's always people stealing stuff. So I mean, there's nothing new as far as that goes. It's just how you create fail-safes. You know, I mean, when you got a bank, you know, you got the physical cash being transported in armored cars, you got guards and things of that nature. It makes it harder to break into a bank and steal the physical cash. It's a lot easier to sit on your computer and make up a computer program to hack an online currency versus going and stealing physical cash, and then obviously going and stealing gold and silver.
And honestly, it's more lucrative to steal the digital cash. I mean, like even like Michael Parenti said that the cost of the police in thwarting a bank robbery is almost always greater. This was actually sampled in a Choking Victim album. I won't. I'll I'll put that out there. But the cost of the police in those cases is almost always greater than the amount the robbers stole from the bank, right? So what can we tell from that? Well, it's not that they want to recover the money. It's that they want to show people that you cannot screw with the global banking system, right? You can't operate outside of the parameters that we've told you. You can't just go to a bank and take the money and spend it. No, you can't do that. You have to operate within the rules that the bankers and the global, state, pro-state actors have set up. You can't just go and take money, right? That's what the message they're sending by thwarting bank robberies. Because they almost always spend more money on solving a bank robbery case than they do, just letting them go. But what the message they want to send is that no, you have to operate within our rules, our parameters, and you have to follow are dictates in these cases when it comes to economics, because it's a monopoly of power, it's a monopoly of control. And that's what economics is about. At the end of the day, money isn't about money. It isn't about resources. It's about power. And that's essentially what it comes down to when you talk about anything having to do with states. They're talking about power. They view currencies as an aspect of power, not resource control. They only think about resources so far as it has to do with their own control of power.
I think when you look that's one of the issues that I'm looking at with this cryptocurrency, is that it does go outside of the parameter of the financial institutions. And one of the things I've been thinking of in the last week or so, ever since this happened, is when online, isn't there a way to tag the domain that you're under? If you get these bitcoins, isn't there a way to somehow link these bitcoins to you underneath your route and your domain? I mean,
that's an aspect of what they call the blockchain, which again I'm not familiar with the technical aspects, but this thing called the blockchain is supposedly able to take an individual Bitcoin, for example, and show exactly what transactions it's been through its entire history, if I'm not mistaken.
I would think, if that's the case, then I think whoever stole these 744,000 Bitcoins, whenever they show up, it's almost like a marked bill. When you go and spend a marked bill, then people are going to know, okay, well, you're the one that obviously stole this money.
And I imagine that'll happen. Somebody will be caught holding the bag. It's just with cryptocurrencies like this and online, there's so many ways to double blind things. I feel like, and maybe I'm just being conspiratorial here, but I feel like when they do find somebody holding the bag, it's going to be somebody that a state or a financial institution decides should be holding the bag. You understand what I mean? I feel like it's going to be caught in the pockets of somebody who is going to be beneficial to a state actor. I'm very suspicious of this whole Mt. Gox thing, man. I feel like I honestly feel like this whole thing was some kind of orchestrated attempt to devalue Bitcoin and to start a conversation about regulating Bitcoin. I just, from the people who are going to benefit from it and the resources that they have, state actors, financial institutions, I feel like this was an orchestrated thing, and maybe I'm off base here, and let me know if I'm being off base, but
I'll look at it like this. Like I said earlier in the beginning of this, I talked about the guy who I saw on CNBC. When I saw him on CNBC, that was the day that all this was going on. Now, he was saying that he had been in talks with the world, with a few world banks in the U.S. government. Is that coincidental? Yeah. But, I don't know. I mean, he said, now in his words, he said that they were close to coming to an agreement of a site. So, I mean, is it odd that they happen to be talking about this on the day that this happened? Now, did they have this guy on because he has stake in Bitcoin and he's, a fan of Bitcoin and believes in Bitcoin? I mean, he definitely was pro-Bitcoin while he was talking, pro-cryptocurrency in general. But, it was an interesting little aside that, he's talking about getting associated with world banks. Obviously, there in this world, anything can be given the conspiratory spin.
Yeah.
And there's been enough cases in the world where things have happened and it's been found out later that there was involvement from people who there shouldn't have been involvement from. So it's obviously not completely off base to theorize on the conspiratory end. But I think it's important to maintain a sort of open-mindedness about everything as the facts come out and to look at the facts as they are. look at them as they're coming out, and to not when someone says it's a fact, to not then just believe that it's a fact. Do your own investigation of the facts that are being called facts, and kind of come to a conclusion for yourself, because that's kind of the cool thing about life, is that we all have the ability to create our own reality, and we all have the ability to experience reality how we experience it. So when somebody tells you something, you can be staring at a white door and somebody tells you it's black and you clearly know it's white. Well, you can sit there and you can say, okay, yeah, sure, whatever you say, and then after you leave, walk away thinking, well, that door was white, that person was crazy. I'm not going to believe them. So, but the important thing to remember is that when we're looking at these things, of what might be coming out. What I'm sure there's going to be a bunch more things that are going to come out about this
in the coming days. Yeah,
it's important to take each bit of information, remember the information that's already been released, look at it on a much larger scale, not compartmentalize it and look at it from a microscope, and just look at the whole, because too many times in society we like to look at the tiny things. We like to look at the little pieces instead of looking at the greater whole of how all these things fit together, because it's not an individual thing. There's more at play than just, oh, somebody hacked this Mt. Gox. There's other factors involved. There were people who were sitting around waiting to do things. There's other things that were already being, obviously, like this thing with the world banks. They were obviously in talks about before this happened. Now, I'm not saying that they had anything to do with this, but I'm saying that they were in talks before this happened. So there was a talk about trying to regulate Bitcoin before this happened. Now, is this going to speed up that process? There's a chance, but you gotta look at everything. You gotta look at the whole. You can't just look at an individual part.
It brings to mind Adam Smith, the great capitalist messiah, Adam Smith, And even he said that the capitalist class, I'm paraphrasing, cannot sit down for drinks and dinner together without conspiring to fix prices. I mean, even Adam Smith said, yeah, of course, captains of the industry are not going to sit down together without talking about business and trying to find ways that they could all mutually benefit from business. I mean, that's not a radical idea at all. That two people who are deeply invested in the capitalist system, very powerful, will sit down and conspire to fix prices. I mean, it's ludicrous to think that they wouldn't do that. So they're in talks about Bitcoin when this happens, whether or not they had any involvement in it. I mean, clearly they're going to be sitting down to conspire to find a way that they can benefit from it. And that's not, I don't think that's insane. I don't think that's a conspiracy theory. That's just what happens.
I just want to clarify real quick on the idea of conspiring.
Yeah.
That's not an evil term.
No.
We have to remember is when you say these large, powerful people conspire together, they're not conspiring together to crash the world market. That is not in their best interest whatsoever.
No.
These people want to make money.
Right.
What they conspire to do is, can we make a couple extra million on this quarter? Yeah, let's you change your price, and therefore that will affect prices for me in this sector, and then we'll both make money. It's not about causing radical change that is going to screw up the giant structure that they have in place. It's just little tweaks here and there where they might be able to make a couple extra million on this quarter or that quarter, whatever.
Honestly, the three of us conspire to come together and do this podcast. That's a definition of a conspiracy. We sit down and we say, hey, I'm going to be free at this time. Let's all meet at this time and do this particular action. It's a conspiracy, right? So conspiracy isn't, I love Alex Jones to death, but it's not his version of a conspiracy theory,
Right.
Yeah, I don't always agree with Alex, but I respect what he's doing. But his definition of a conspiracy is not the same as my definition of a conspiracy, So, and certainly Adam Smith's definition of a conspiracy is not the same as Alex Jones' definition of a conspiracy. Adam Smith viewed it as a natural outpouring of capitalism, something that would constantly happen, and which is why Adam Smith advocated. He was a statist. He advocated states to regulate, markets. He was not a free market guy at the core. I mean, he understood the fact that a state would be needed to regulate capitalism, or capitalism would not be able to exist.
It's to me, this whole cryptocurrency is just a sign of the times. It's a reflection of the internet. It's a reflection of the quote-unquote chaotic, decentralized nature of the internet, which is a currency that reflects that. And yeah, to me, I mean, if I were running some sort of established monetary cartel that was controlling all the money, this would be extremely threatening to me.
Yeah,
a currency that's breaking my little scheme of what's possible as far as exchanging monetary value is concerned. It's giving people options, and I think that's the beauty of it. Bitcoin might fail, might disappear, but the idea that we're having all these options in place, and in the potential of innovation of newer currencies, of newer ideas. We were talking earlier of the alternative. I don't think there is going to be an alternative. I don't think it's a singular thing. Yeah. I think it could be a series. It could be a work in progress. One quarter we might have one new form of currency. The next quarter we may have something totally different, something a few steps further that we can't even conceive of at this point in time.
Right.
But I think the important thing is that we start going down that path, that we start innovating, that we start experimenting. I think only in the end good things could come from it. I don't think it's going to be detrimental. It may be scary. It might be scary if you're thinking about investing all your money into it. But at the end of the day, I think only good things could happen.
I agree. And I feel like dynamic multiple solution ways of figuring these things out are key. I mean, I believe deeply in decentralization, that decentralized systems are far more stable than centralized systems, right? I mean, even looking at nature is essentially a decentralized web of interconnected principles and foundations, right? And in the natural world, if you take a look at an ecosystem, it works very well. And I think we should probably take a lesson from that. The decentralized systems are, in the long term, far more stable than centralized systems. And that can go for economics as well.
Right.
And I have a lot more faith in decentralized solutions and multiple solution ideas.
Which makes you wonder, how could anybody think that the way we're doing things now, long term, I'm talking 100 years, could sustain itself?
Just look at the climate change figures. I mean, total human being death in 100 years in some cases. You know what I mean? It's shocking. That's not sustainable.
No, and I'm talking just a pure economic sense.
Yeah, right.
I think the word that we're looking for here is complementary. There is no one solution, but there's complementary aspects that can be utilized. We have, obviously, the majority of the world trades through monetary of US dollar, euro, yen, all the other major currencies of the world. Obviously, there's still a large market for gold and silver. That's never going to go away. And now we have cryptocurrency. If you invest all your money in cash, if you invest all your money in gold, if you invest all your money in cryptocurrency, there's a good chance you could get screwed down the road. But if you diversify in all three of those currencies, I have a hard time believing that all three of those things are going to fall apart. Could one fall at one point in time and then another thing that's not even around rise up? Yeah. But I think it's important to diversify and complement everything you're doing. It's like, it's just like in the stock market. would you invest all your money in Amazon stock or Google stock? I mean, that's not going to make you money. You know, you have to have different things at your disposal in case something were to fall, because nothing's forever. You know, I mean, I always look back when this first happened with this Bitcoin thing. The first thing I thought of was Enron, because they said that, you know, Mt. Gox froze transactions, and it kind of left people, you know, screwed, really, not being able to to trade out their Bitcoins and get the cash. Well, that's the same thing that happened with a lot of the Enron employees. When Enron started falling, they froze the trading of the Enron stock. And, I mean, look how far it fell before. People were getting pennies. And this was a stock that was trading for hundreds of dollars. Yeah. So, you know, if that's where you got all your money, well, then, yeah, you're going to be screwed. But the nice thing about Bitcoin is that it's not your 401k for, you know, the company you're working for. It's your alternative to your 401k. It's another option to make money and to financially set yourself up for the future.
Right, and that's the exact reason why it's so threatening, because it's challenging their monopoly on the idea of currency.
Yeah,
and that's why that's the exact reason, in my opinion at least, why it's a threat.
Sure. Yeah, it's deeply threatening to those ideals, deeply threatening toward, well, at least the established, for the last 50 years or so, 100 years, the established idea of what currency is. You know, this is a very new thing. And you're right, diversification is going to be key to it, because unless they tie all these things together, unless they're able to step in and say, hey, we're going to tie Bitcoin to this currency and regulate it, or, you know, any of those things, you know, you'll have that fail-safe in terms of investing. That's what's beautiful about that decentralized system. Now, if they're able to take the cryptocurrencies and tie them to state currencies, well, then the whole house of cards goes down together. And that's the major problem there.
I don't think that's in their best interest, and I think that there are people involved in that will agree with that, because, you know, I have a hard time believing that any banker, any big banker, has 100% faith in paper currency. If you tie Bitcoin into that whole realm, you're killing two birds with one stone, basically. You know, if something were to happen to the dollar, or to any major currency, really, I mean, the dollar is obviously is the main currency of the world. You know, I don't think that's in their best interest to do that. Now, will they do that? Who knows? Will they do that to keep Bitcoin from being a possibility if paper currency were to fall? Yeah, possibly. Well, I mean, I think that's why gold and silver has always been around. But I think smart bankers out there see this third option as an option of intrigue, and I think that they see that if they could have more control over and regulate it a little bit better, I think they would then be more open to it being a complementary of paper money and obviously gold and silver, because like we were saying earlier, you know, Bitcoin's being traded as a commodity right now. It's being traded like gold and silver.
Yeah.
So it's not really being looked at in the traditional way that we look at currency. It's not being traded. You know, there are some businesses that accept it, but the vast majority don't still. And you know, it's just like the same thing. You don't go to your local supermarket and, you know, pay them in a couple silver coins. You know, you pay them in cash. So it's being looked at that way. You know, as far as the commodities are concerned, will that change? Yeah, I mean, there are people out there that I'm sure that, you know, they accept payment in gold or silver, but it's I think it's still young. I think it's still in the early stages of, and I think that this Mt. Gox thing didn't help, but it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see in the next 5 years. Like I said, I think Bitcoin's only been around for no more than 10 years, but I really think it's only been about 5 years. So it'll be interesting in the next 5-10 years to see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these alternatives are something we're going to see more and more, especially because I think it's a reaction against the mainstream economic system. I think it represents an unrest with the mainstream economic system that people are starting with these currencies and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what alternatives really do happen in the next few years.